Welcome to the RFP Success Show with host Lisa Rehurik, the #1 sought-after authority on RFP success. Each week, we bring you information, strategies, or resources to help you win more business through RFPs and have a little fun doing it. Let's get this week's episode started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Rehurik, founder and CEO of the RFP Success Company. And today I have our wonderful guest, Natalie Sayre, and she is an executive coach, actually a certified global executive coach and NSA professional speaker. And I'm so excited that Natalie is here today. We're going to talk a little bit about storyboarding. So welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here today.
We're going to have a great conversation. And what's so exciting about this is going to be a series. This is the first of 2 interviews that I'm doing around storyboarding, because storyboarding is something that is used lightly in the RFP world. I don't think that a lot of people use it as much as they should. And frankly, I don't use it very much as well. So what's really cool is that Natalie's going to talk to us today about what storyboarding is and where it came from and why it's important, and really not necessarily relate it directly to RFPs. And then we're going to bring on another guest next week who is going to be telling us how they apply it specifically to RFPs. But this is really great because, Natalie, how long has it been since you've been storyboarding?
I started storyboarding in 1988.
Yeah, so she knows her stuff, and I really wanted to find somebody that knew what storyboarding was and has all sorts of applicability. So we're going to talk about that as well. So Natalie, why don't we kick it off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and also how you got started with storyboarding.
Right. So, well, I'm an executive coach now, working in the global executive space. I started my career at General Motors as an engineer. And so I have 2 engineering degrees, undergrad from the University of Dayton, master's from the University of Michigan in manufacturing systems engineering.
Wow.
And it was in my first department, which was, okay, we're going to take it back to 1988. It was called Value Management, Synchronous Manufacturing, and Statistical Methods. Okay, let's fast forward it. It's still Value Management or Value Engineering. Lean, which I wrote Lean for Dummies twice. So that's a thing that's in the past for the process improvement world. And then over on this side, it's really what became Six Sigma. So the whole
nice
data and data driven and for continuous improvement and for making decisions, et cetera. So as part of that, my boss sent me to a creative planning. I pulled out the archives. This is a notebook. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's for those of you that are just listening, she's holding up this notebook that I think is probably from years past.
It is from 1988. Yeah. Because I've moved a bunch of times, and there are very few things that moved with me. And the source material. So storyboarding, we'll back up in a second where storyboarding came from. But how I was introduced to it was for creative planning. And so it was really everything from strategic plans, and I storyboarded a move during one of my projects of the class. Nice. So it's really a method when you're trying to brainstorm or develop a storyline or a plan that is external. So let's back up. Where did storyboarding come from? It comes from the Disney. In 1930s, and I'm looking over here because I wanted to make sure I got it right, Disney credited animator Webb Smith with creating the idea of drawing scenes on separate sheets of paper. So it's one idea per card or per piece of paper. Index cards are my friend. Yes, there's software out there. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I have found that when you're truly getting people to engage, we're on screens and texting so much that when you pull out the old school method, people engage in a different way.
Yep.
So the idea of storytelling is it's putting up externally, so on a wall, on a screen, one thought per card, and so that you're truly creating a story. So if you think about animation, and they also use it in game design, right? So if you think about that, they're trying to get frame by frame by frame by frame the continuity. Is the story arcing? Is the image going with the story? So when you take it back to its purest forms, it's a tool that they used in animation, especially at Disney, for years. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, and that's so interesting too. And it's really easy for us to go, well, but that's Disney and it's all about, storytelling, and that's not necessarily relevant in the business world. But it is, right?
Oh, it is, right? That's why do you think storytelling is such a big thing in business? Because when we're trying to get our thoughts across, we want them to be very clear and cogent, and that they tell or they arc a story, even if we're telling that story with data and information, right? And if you think about giant plans, right? I started up an airbag plant at one point in time in my career.
Wow.
I was something. Did I know what it took to start up an airbag plant? It was processes and procedures and equipment that we'd never seen before, and what's the mindset we wanted to create in our employees. And there were just all of these things, and if you keep them here, either you miss things or it doesn't come out as a cohesive thought or a cohesive action plan. So I mentioned when I went through the workshop of creating creative planning that McNellis did, I had never moved from home. I had gone to school and I lived at home and commuted, and I had a term in Mexico, but that was when he moved me there on my work term.
Right.
So it was, okay, you're going to move. I was in my childhood home. I didn't know how to move. What were all of the things I needed to do to move? And so I got input from all sorts of people in all sorts of perspectives on things to consider. The whole real estate transaction. How do you find a community? How do you find a home? How far is the commuting distance? Like all of these things to think about, and then put them, you've got a boatload of ideas. Then how do you put them in a sequence that turns into an action plan?
So why not just do a list? Like,
because
or an outline.
Storyline, arcing, thread, and an outline is usually singular. Right? This is getting multiple perspectives and multiple people together. Although I do storyboard by myself, and in another room, I have a storyboard going for a book. And so it's like, what's the arc? Who are the people that I need to get input from? I've got a storyboard for a website idea. Same thing. Yep. So I don't know if people do this anymore, but back in the day when we would write research papers, we were encouraged to do one thought per card. And as you put I'm going old school. And half the audience is going to go, research paper? What? Index card? Write manually? Are you kidding me?
It's powerful, though.
When you are manually writing versus machine writing, you're accessing a different part of the brain.
Yes.
So, I'm holding up an index card. It is a 3x5 white card. This is the tool of my storyboarding trade. I also use different sizes if I want a header or it's an idea, or you can pull color into it. I recently did a storyboarding project. We had 48 feet of wall space. Plan with a client, and the client had 16 different leaders that needed to input to this cogent thought.
Yikes.
Right? So this plan to make sure we don't miss anything, what's interlinked. And when you have one idea, you can move things around. Oh, wait a minute. We don't really need that over in August. We need that in September. So let's move it. And wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Doesn't this have to come before that? And so you have the flexibility to move the ideas around. Whether you're doing a strategic plan, whether you're doing an action plan for a project, whether you're trying to put your storyline together for a website, how do you speak to your clients? What is the backstory? What are the additional thoughts and brainstorms? If you're doing a website, you might want to have an area that's images, and you can actually put the images up on the wall to go with the text and go with the content. And so, especially for extroverts, extroverts love storyboarding like they love brainstorming, but you also get the introverts on when you've got the cards, because they can be off to the side writing down their ideas. True. And if it's facilitated, then the facilitator brings all of the input together. So when I run a storyboarding session, everyone has a Sharpie marker and everyone has a stack of cards. If we're doing it in a certain way that I want it color coded, I swap out the color stacks of cards so that, color can mean things. It could be imagery, it could be data input needed, it could be thoughts of the story. I recently did an RFP application. So I'm going to...
Oh, interesting. I love it.
You, right, to your world, that was responding to an RFP for community college. We don't know if we got the work or not.
Okay.
we needed to tell a story and we needed to respond to their requests and do so in a way that was not only we followed your outline and have answered everything in order as you wanted us to. Right. Which a lot of, especially public RFPs, can become very confining because they need exactly. How do you enter creativity and weaving a story into we responded to you, right?
Right.
So it was, what was the, you start with the end in mind, right? What is the outcome that we want to get across? And what are the inputs? Where is the data coming from? Do we have it all? Do we need more? So we were able to brainstorm and then organize into a task list, right? So you can, I've actually done storyboards that are nothing more than doing, done. So if I have a whole bunch of stuff and I'm in overwhelm, I have one assignment per card with a due date. I can prioritize them. I can change the priority. And one wall of my office is a big storyboard.
Yeah. I love it. So let's take a quick step back because I want you to talk a little bit about arcing. And for all of you who've been around for a while listening, well, anybody listening, obviously you can go back and this has probably been about a year now, but we did a podcast on storytelling. So you can go back and if you need a refresher around storytelling, but can you explain to the listeners what you mean when you talk about the arc? Because there's probably a lot of people listening that have not ever been exposed to that and don't know.
Okay, so I'm going to do it in two ways. And this goes back to McNellis's process. So in the arc of maybe not the story, but the arc of a session, right? Okay. The first steps would be lay down the ground rules, lay down what's in and out of the discussion.
Okay.
And then for those of you who are listening and not watching, you expand through brainstorming. So I'm opening my hands up almost into like a V that is open wide.
Yep.
And then you take a break, you walk away, and then you come back together and you start narrowing down what's in and what's out.
Okay.
And then you end with an action plan.
So that middle part is the arc, right?
So that whole thing really is an arc, right? True. So I'm going to lay a foundation. I'm going to get very creative. I'm going to stop the action. I'm going to refine ideas down so that I can go do something. So that is an arc of a design of a session.
Okay.
Right? That would be a brainstorming session. So like in the case of a strategic plan, I'm going to dump all of the things out there that I think I need to consider in the brainstorming phase. And in the ground laying phase, I'm going to say, okay, this plan is going to be a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan, right? So then I'm going to brainstorm everything I need to consider. And then as I'm in a refinement mode, I might put the tasks that are 5 years in a 5 year category, in a 3 year category, in a 1 year category. And then I might have 3 baby action plans, a 1 year, a 3 year, a 5 year that end up at the end, right? We would refine each of those within a category. When I talk about storytelling, so let's say responding to the RFP, you're trying to tell the story as to why you are the best firm to perform the work. And so how do you tell them in a way that they hear it, they see it, and they don't go, so what?
Right. Or that you don't blend into everybody else.
Which is a so what?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And, we talk a lot about this with my clients about, you've got to kind of hold their hand and guide them through and make them feel what it's going to be like to work with you. This is no longer, and, I think this has been around forever, and I'd like your opinion on this, but I feel like in today's day and age, that's even more important. There's much more emotion attached to buying than ever before. Would you agree with that?
I would say that. And they're also, before, your world was a lot smaller and you had relationships that you relied upon and you were doing business more locally. Right now I'm doing business globally because the technology enables me to do that. I have traveled and done leadership work in 16 countries. So, I have contacts that I can connect into and I can say, who do you know, or what makes me different in your culture, or, so there's that relationship piece that still has to be developed, but in a different way. But I think the competition pool is so much larger because the technology, I get a daily email that says what works out there, in what state, in what region from a United States standpoint and Canada. And it's like, do I want to go for this or not? Am I qualified or not? Do I have an in or not?
Right.
Right. So, let's say you're teaming with somebody to respond to an RFP. How do you weave a coherent story between two different organizations?
I love that.
So it's like I have my experience. So maybe they're looking for 3 or 4 examples of a similar scaled job that you have done. Well, maybe alone you don't have them, but if you team with somebody, you have them.
Yep.
And then how do you be transparent enough to say, okay, well, we might be responding to this RFP under this business entity, but this lead person has had these experiences under this name. And this,
Yes.
So how do you weave it to make sure, especially when it's teaming, it gets kind of interesting.
It does. That's a really great application.
Yeah. So it's like, how do you communicate your philosophy? How do you communicate the experience of working with you? If you think of an arc of a story or a hero's journey, there's ups and downs, right? So how do you work with us when things aren't going well? How do you work with us when things are great? And here's what we commit to do. How do we, work together when not all of the inputs are being received? Like a lot of times clients actually deliver when they're supposed to.
It's so true. And and then they like to blame it on the, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, how do we recover? Telling a story is how do we recover if and when. Wink, wink. We all know it's probably when. Scope creeps or timelines, slip for various reasons, all well-intentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading a statistic not too long ago, and it was in the 80s, somewhere in the upper 80s, like maybe 88%. 88% of consumers would rather buy from a company who had bad reviews, but did a great job of recovering from those reviews and responding to those reviews versus a company that had all 5-star reviews. And so I really love your point in there about like, hey, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Sometimes shit's going to hit the fan and it's not going to be fun, but it's all about the recovery of it and how we handle it. And that's really, in my opinion, where some of the biggest trust is built, right?
Recovery in the communication process.
Yes.
So if you're thinking about storyboarding, right, a storyboard application, our end in mind is that we want to win the work. Now, at the beginning, we might say we're not going to, what we'll talk about in this and what we won't talk about, right? So what's in scope is obviously everything that the client is asking for.
Yep.
And we might decide to add a few more things. Maybe they're not asking for a conflict resolution process, but we might provide that to set ourselves apart. Or we may say, no, we are not talking about anything extra, that if we get to the interview stage, we'll talk about it then. So you're making strategic decisions when you're starting at the very beginning, saying what's in and what's out of scope.
Do you ever have teams that are resistant to storyboarding?
Yes.
How do you help overcome that? Well, 2 questions, actually. What are they resistant towards? I mean, is it the linear thinkers that are resistant towards it? So what are they resistant towards? And then how do you help overcome that resistance?
I think it's, I don't think I've had a specific resistor profile, like facilitating other facilitators to their strategic plan. There was resistance there because my process is different than their process and they like their process better, right? So I've had that scenario. I've had this scenario where people feel it's tedious to write the cards and why couldn't we? So if it's a team that I've worked with before, I might say, come in with cards already prepared, because then that cuts down on some of the time. It's a
good idea, yeah.
When you're doing storyboarding, you really want to have a facilitator. You want to have somebody that's owning the process of pulling information out of people.
And probably not super involved.
Not involved. They're a process manager, not a content manager.
Yeah.
Now, you might be both, but you have to, you might give your card. If you have to be content and process, then you might give your ideas to a surrogate that they can put the information up, because usually the information you have, somebody else says it. So you don't always have to be the expert in the room, right?
Yep.
But if you see that you're done and you've exhausted a phase, maybe it's brainstorming around what is all the data that we need to go get, right? And you think of something that somebody hasn't said and you're the facilitator, then that would be the appropriate time to say, I'm going to step out of my facilitator role just for a minute. And here are 3 ideas that I think we've missed that are important to put on there. and then go back into your facilitator role. So be very transparent about it, but it always works better when there's somebody mining the process or mining the process.
I just really love this process. And, you know, of course, because my company is all about RFPs and I think about that, I do storyboarding for myself for strategic planning every year. And when I write a book, I do storyboarding. I mean, I don't know how anybody writes a book without doing that. But, you know, it's so interesting, the applicability of RFPs, because they do feel so confined. Most of my clients are in the government space, in the state, local, and they feel so confined. And so people, you know, there have been very successful times where we've done this. I don't do it on a regular basis, but, you know, in this conversation and even before, actually, when you and I talked before, I was like, you know, it's such a powerful thing. I think we need to bring it in more, but it really means that you have to carve time out to talk about the strategy of it, which so many people don't do in RFPs and generally is a big no-no in my opinion, because if you don't set that strategy up front, then, you know, you're just like everybody else.
Well, I think here is an important thing. You know, we usually answer one question when we're answering the RFP, one main question. What are they asking for?
Yep.
And then the secondary question is, how can we convince them that we're it, right? So when you're doing a storyboarding, especially in the brainstorming phase, you're using questions to draw out different perspectives. So one of the questions that I would throw on in an RFP context is, what makes us different?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, it would be
always a big question.
When have we been successful in this kind of work, and what did we do differently that time, or what should we repeat because it worked really well? When you're looking at most public RFPs have some kind of interview phase after you've been shortlisted.
A lot of times.
A lot of times, right? Not always, but let's say it's more than 50%. Would you agree with that?
I'd say it's probably close to 50%.
All right.
But
so half the time. Yeah. And usually people are scrambling because they're like, okay, we got shortlisted. Who's going to go and who's going to answer and what does our presentation look like?
Right.
And if you storyboard, you can actually put that as part of your strategy going into it. So while you're writing the RFP, you can start thinking about, okay, when we get shortlisted, you know, that positive thinking, when we get shortlisted, who is our interview team? What's important? What graphics, you know, would be important for us to include? Maybe there's something to prep or tease the interview that you would end up putting in the RFP. But it's one of those slow down to speed up things, right? So
it is.
And it's usually a different team of people responding to the RFP that carry forward the work, depending on the size of the organization. So it's how do you be more strategic about how you respond to RFPs?
Yep.
And what I have found that so often we go back and forth in emails and we're trying to chase each other down.
Brutal.
Add all that time up. If you would have just cleared a day or a day and a half of the calendar to focus on it, you wouldn't have to spend all this back and forth time.
Well, and I think too, like even on the back end, because if you've got, let's say 8 writers that are all contributing and you haven't set the stage appropriately for how they need to be writing, again, maybe they're technical writers and they're just writing to the question. If you've got all those different writers, you've got all this time on the back end that now you've got to bring it all together and make it sound cohesive. You'll still have some of that time, but it will be far reduced because we'll have given them some direction. And I think the writers would greatly appreciate that. So now let's talk about manual versus electronic, because you mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast. You do it manually with your index cards, and I use Post-it notes. I love all the different colors of Post-it notes, so that's what I use. But there are electronic versions. Can you talk about that a little bit and what the benefit of either one is?
So I am not going to profess to be an expert of the software packages that are out there. I mean, there are some storyboarding packages that are very specifically for illustrated work, right? So movies, game design, training, like e-learning type classes. I have used storyboarding, like I've used Visio, I've used PowerPoint, but you're essentially simulating cards. And then you've got people sitting around watching a screen, getting disconnected, picking up their phone because they've got other things coming in and dinging them. And so the time then becomes scattered and not focused.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I prefer to do group storyboarding with a more manual method. I tend to like index cards. I used to have foam core boards. They don't travel so well. So now I have sticky walls.
Yep. I love sticky walls.
I have 48 feet of sticky wall that I can travel, and basically, so if you are going off site and you need a ballroom, or if you're trying to schedule a conference room, you need to make sure that you have enough wall to be able to anchor to, because there's a lot of cool windows and cool offices, and so it might not be current and chic to to go manual, but I think you get a higher level of engagement. Because like I said earlier, people are they don't know how to talk to each other. I mean, they're so screen time, they're so email, they're so FaceTime or Skype, or they're so like this, that when you start getting them engaging in conversation in a different way, the visual different way is actually to use the one thought per piece of paper, per Post-it, per card. Now, resistance, people would try to put 2 or 3 things on a card, and you have to
interesting.
That because you have to get the why behind it. Well, if you have 5 things on there and we need to spread those 5 things across in the planning phase into different people being assigned to them or different timing, rather than having to rewrite the cards, let's keep one thought per, because you have a lot more flexibility in your thinking when it's just one thought per card.
You know what's cool about that too is it forces them to think simplistically. And when I'm working with teams that are highly technical, that's really hard for them. And so I can see that exercise being really good. It might be painful in the beginning to get them really focused on that one thought per card, but I can see how beneficial that is.
Well, and I think at that juncture, that's the importance of the facilitator actually setting the process up.
Yes.
And even before you ever get into the gathering day, how do you set it up so people have the mindset? It could be as simple as, we do a quick video call and say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Here is how we're going to do it. If one of your ground rules is that you're going to pre-fill out cards, then say, okay, you're going to use white index cards 3x5 or white index cards 4x6. So you want to specify the size. If you as a facilitator in your design, you have to design what your thinking is. So the cards mean things. And Sharpie markers, Sharpie. But not fine line Sharpie, the big old regular, giant Sharpie either. But the idea is be able to read from 10 to 15 feet across the room. So if you're around the table, you want to be able to look over there and go, oh yeah, we wanted to do, gather past project data or something. So
I love it.
The other thing is, again, it's a facilitator thing, but when the facilitator truly draws out the introverts, and so, I'm an engineer. I've been around very techie people all my career. Yep. And they usually don't expect me to be an engineer, and they're usually like, okay, you're way too out there for us, so I have to tone it down. But you asked earlier, how do I cajole and charm the resistors, basically? Oh, come on, just play. Yeah.
I love that though. But, and I think they appreciate that too, because I think sometimes introverts want to say something, but they're maybe overpowered by the extroverts in the room, or, feeling like that my idea is going to be a dumb idea or whatever that looks like.
And so again, I'm going to hold up the card. There's power in the pen, right? So if I have a bunch of introverts in the room and I give them time so I put a question up there, right? So what makes us different as a firm? Maybe that's the question.
Yep.
And I give you 5 minutes to put your ideas around. And then I'm looking to see, maybe it doesn't, I throw 5 minutes out there. It might be 3 minutes, 20 seconds, right? Because when people are slowing down, or I say, when you're done, put your pen down. That'll be my clue that you guys are ready to start putting things up there. So it actually gives you as a facilitator a way to safely bring in the introverts so that they're not getting romped on. And a lot of times then if I'm in that zone, then I'll say, okay, we're going to just go around the table. Who wants to start? And then we'll just go around the table from there so that everybody starts putting in ideas. They start getting rid of their duplicate cards.
Yes.
And then we go and say, does anybody have anything else? Maybe we do 2 rounds around the table if we have 10 people.
Yep.
I have done facilitated storyboarding with as many as 35 people.
I was just going to ask you about kind of the sweet spot for the number of people.
It depends on how complex. And I might, and if you have multiple facilitators, then you as facilitators need to align. Maybe you split the room and you've got 2 boards going on different tasks or something.
Nice.
But when it gets much more than 15 in a very complex project, sometimes you need all 15 voices, sometimes you don't.
Right.
So I really think that when you're putting your list of invitees for input together, you want to have maybe an A team that's 7 to 9 people, and then the nice to have people that goes up to about 15, and then on-call resources.
Okay.
So you can think of it like that, because not everybody needs to be there for the entire thing.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
I've storyboarded with as few as 1 myself or 2, but when you're really getting into, I'm thinking RFP responses, usually you've got a team of people that have to provide, a marketing input, a technical input, a business case input, past project, I'm not sure who your core team is when you think about RFPs.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with RFPs in, public responses as well as construction.
Got it. Yep. Yeah, and really, I mean, for most of those industries, it's really not that different. People think it's a lot different, but it really isn't. You still have the same thing. You've got requirements that you have to stick with. You've got questions you've got to answer, and you've got to somehow differentiate yourself. And, one of the things that I always say too is, like, you're not just competing on your qualifications and your capabilities. You're competing on attention span. Yep. And how are you going to get that attention span from human beings that are sitting on the other side of this trying to read this, that are not in the mood, that are bored with your number 3 or number 6 or whatever, and they're bored, and they, there's a lot more that goes into that human nature reading your response than just answering the boring questions.
Well, and so I would say storyboarding isn't just, hey, let's all get together in a room and throw a bunch of cards on the wall.
Right.
You design the session for success. So if you are designing a session to respond to an RFP, then, you need to know the players. You need to know the outcome. You need to know what questions beyond what they're asking for us. What needs to be in our cover letter that's unique and different, right? How are we going to deliver this? Are we going to FedEx it? Are we going to hand deliver? Are we, so you can start asking, or getting the list of questions together that really cover the fullness of how to respond to RFPs. And just you're using a different medium, storyboarding, to pull that information out and organize it. So I'm sure in your book that you've got great tips and techniques on how to successfully respond to RFPs. As a facilitator of a storyboarding session for one of your clients, if you needed a storyboarding input as an example, I would confer with you, or I would go into your book and go, what are the cool questions that Lisa asked? Then we got to make sure that we ask the team or yourself. If you would go back into your own book going, hey, cool things. So
I love it. Well, this has been really great. And even, as you're saying, as you're saying that too, I'm thinking, a lot of my clients are, okay, we're going to bid on this contract, but there's an incumbent in there, which becomes even more, there's even more differentiator you have to have if you're trying to unseat somebody. Or it's our contract. We've had this for 20 years. We don't want to lose it, but the competition's coming in strong.
Yep.
How are you going to get in there and really dig? And I can see how storyboarding can really hugely help in both of those instances. And it's almost always one or the other. Sometimes it's a one-off contract, but with my clients, a lot of times it's one or the other. So,
well, and so, from an incumbent standpoint, as a facilitator, I would start thinking about what can keep our image fresh. What successful relationships have we built that we can leverage? Yes. What are some of the quotes that we have of our long-term client that would just really support our longevity or maybe winning adjacent work, right?
Yep.
When there's an incumbent in there, then it's a different strategy, right? It's
different questions
to ask.
Yeah.
And so you would just make sure that in your design, you're thinking beyond how are we responding? You're thinking, it's almost how do we win this work is the big question that you start out with.
Yeah. How are we going to be the ones? And I always say too, like, how are we going to be the ones that they're like, no question, they emotionally want you, right? They've still maybe got to tick off the boxes and all of that, but emotionally they're like, oh my God, I can't wait to work with these people. Or, how are we going to get them excited where they kind of almost put the blinders on for everybody else? And that's really the story we need to tell. And storyboarding is going to help us get there. So this has been so fantastic. Natalie, thank you so much for being our guest.
This has been fun. And I wish for all your clients and your listeners that if they haven't ever storyboarded, that they try it.
I agree.
And, that they win many, many, many RFPs. And if storyboarding can help them to make their responses stronger, then that they try it.
Yep. I love it. Thank you so much. Now, if anybody wants to connect with you and learn more about you, how can they do that?
The best place is LinkedIn. I mean, Perfect. We all go on LinkedIn. Natalie J. Sayre on LinkedIn. I also am NJ Sayre on Twitter. You can Twitter that way. Those are the cleanest ways. From there, you can get to websites and all that fun stuff. So
perfect. Well, wonderful. And all that information will be in the show notes for the listeners. So if you missed that, no worries. Just go to the show notes and that'll be there. So again, Natalie, thank you for being here. This has been fantastic.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Absolutely. And everybody listening, you've been listening to the RFP Success Show, bringing you weekly tips, strategies, resources to help you do better and win more. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you again next week.
You have been listening to the RFP Success Show with RFP expert Lisa Reherik, author of the RFP Success Book. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure you click the subscribe button so you don't miss a show. And thanks for spending time with us today.